Especially I love it on mornings like these when a certain pianist gets very happy on the piano, and I love hearing it.
We had some
Blink, blink, blink.
pace
I love it.
today, didn't they?
Huh?
We had some songs today that had a little pace.
Yeah.
Today, huh?
Yeah. It should be that way. I can't imagine walking into the house of God in which everybody's kind of like, hi, how you doing? You know, it's a place that should remind you what Christ has done for you. If you can't find Christ here in the sanctuary of God's house, where are you going to find it? You know, be happy. Be grateful. This morning, I've skipped a little bit ahead because of, if you haven't noticed yet, this is Communion Sunday. And this morning I'm looking at Matthew 26, verses 14 through 30. Now, some people maybe take a little bit of umbrage and look at it kind of strange. Judas and communion. But I think you have an idea where I'm going this morning. Here's the passage, 14 through 30. Matthew 26, it says this. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests, and said unto them, What will ye give me? And I will deliver him unto you. And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, The Master saith, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now, when the even was come, he sat down with the 12. And as they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and says, He that dippeth his hand with me in this dish, the same shall betray me. The Son of Man goeth as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of God is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, who betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? He said unto him, Thou hast said. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to his disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And when they had sung an hymn, they went out unto the Mount of Olives. Kind and gracious Heavenly Father, I pray this morning that you bless these words and bless this message. Amen. It's an interesting group we see here, the 12. Interesting. He spent all these years with them. Good friends, people close to him, close to heart. Yet, verse 24 says, there was one of them, Judas Iscariot, his last name coming from the city or town that he came from. He went into the chief priests. If he'd done this, that means he had had this planned for a long time. He'd been thinking on this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. He went to the chief priests, the high priests, those who had been high priests, and the ruling men of the Sanhedrin. And what does he say? Look at verse 15. And he said to them, What will you give me, that I will deliver him unto you, that they can... And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. They covenanted. They made a deal with him. They made a bargain with him. I like to think this is where the term made a bargain with the devil comes from. Because that's exactly what Judas did. Oh, I'll tell you what, you do, Judas. You set it up just right, and we'll pay you. And they went to discuss a little bit. They came back, we'll give you 30 pieces of silver. Mike, how do they come up with 30 pieces of silver? You ever wondered that? It's the price of a slave. That's how much contempt leadership and the so-called men of God consider Jesus Christ. He had the same level and the same. They don't care for him. He's just a slave. No rights. Who cares? And Judas said, that sounds good. 26:16 says, now they went out looking for a moment to betray him. Judas is like, I'm going to give him to you. I'm going to give him to your priests. And I'll make sure it's in a place and a time that no one will know about it. Because we don't want the crowds around, because he's way too popular for the crowds for them to arrest. We need a time, Judas, when he's alone. Betray. You ever think about the word betray? You know, if you look it up, it says deliver to the enemy something through treachery. To think that Judas would treat his relationship with Jesus Christ as nothing more than something that is up for sale. I can't imagine. You know, I've had, through my many years, there have been times when I've had really, really, really good friends who tore my heart out, who betrayed me. Anyone else ever been in that scenario? Imagine that. Christ was going to be betrayed by someone that he took into his most inner confidence. He was one of the 12. As I mentioned before, there were other people who followed him, other so-called disciples, but Jesus had specifically chosen these 12 as to be his inner circle, those people that Christ would share everything with. I'm going to show you my heart. I'm going to show you what I believe and what I think and what my Father says. I'm going to tell you everything you possibly need to know about the Father and why I'm here. And I don't want you to let anyone else know. Do you remember how many times he kept telling to his disciples and to those around him, don't let anybody know what I just did? And here's Judas. He waited, and he conspired until, as it says in verse 17, now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? It's an 8-day feast, the feast of unleavened bread. During those days, of course, you couldn't eat any bread or anything else made with yeast or leaven in it. It's a reminder back to Egypt, their departure from Egypt. Passover. Passover comes from the word Paschal, or the Paschal lamb was where, in other words, that was the name given to the lamb that was to be killed and to be eaten that week. The final lamb. This was all leading up to the killing of a lamb. The reminder of Egypt. When a spotless lamb was killed and its blood was poured over the doorways, so the angel of death would not enter that facility, that home. How fitting it was. And Christ says, go into the city, you'll find a man and say to him, my time is at hand, and I will keep Passover at your house with my disciples. Does this sound familiar? He did the same thing with a colt, did he not? You'll find a man. There was a lot of people in Jerusalem that looked so incredibly favorably upon Christ. They saw his miracles. They heard of his miracles. They've met the people that he's helped and healed. You know, just in when he fed the 5,000s, it said all day long he healed people. It's all he did. You think those people went home and were quiet about it? Or do they rejoice to God in the highest and rejoice to Jesus Christ? That many people, it had to have been all over Jerusalem. My time's at hand. I want to spend this time of Passover. My master wants to spend it at your house with us, his disciples. And the disciples did that, just as Christ called them. And they made everything ready in that room for Passover. And when the evening came, that's where they went. They went up there, the 12 of them. Matthew 26 says, and as they did eat, he said, verily I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? Can you imagine the nervousness that went through that room just then? They're looking at each other and they're looking at themselves. Is it me? Jesus, please tell me, is it me? I don't want to think it's me. You know, and all this pain and stress that would give into many of them. Peter and John and James and Bartholomew and the rest of them, feeling that pressure. Is it me, Jesus? It can't be me, is it? Let me know. Let me know. Verse 23 reminds us how close they were. He was going to take the bread and hand it to Judas. If you know those times, they reclined beside each other. There's no way Jesus would have been able to give that piece of bread that was placed into that sauce and given to him unless he was very, very, very close to him. In fact, I love this. Who was the last one to speak? Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? And he said unto him, Thou hast said. Is it me? You said it is. Yes, it's you. Last person to say anything. Surely, teacher, you don't mean me. You catch that? Oh, he's saying the same thing as the rest of them, isn't he? He's the last one. Oh, you don't mean me. Christ is like, yes, so you say, yeah, Judas was the last one to say anything. He remained silent until all the others had spoken. He looked around. His guilt, I truly believe, made him delay. I think he really had a pang of guilt at that moment. He delayed himself. He got close to Christ to make sure that he was the one who spoke last, to make sure he concealed his true intentions. He got close to as he could to him. Isn't that what people do that you're fearful of? People who get really close to you, those are the ones that hurt you the most when they betray you. It's not the next door neighbor who sees you every once in a while. It's not the postman. It's not your friendly neighborhood grocer. It's usually a family member or someone very, very close to you at work. Someone you confide in, and they get close. Judas made sure he was close to Christ up there in that room. Here's how John 13, verses 23 through 30 puts this. So now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him and said, Ask, who is it should be of whom he spake? He then lying on Jesus' breast said unto him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answers, He it is, to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. And after the sop, Satan entered into him, and then Jesus said unto him, That thou doest, do quickly. Now no man at the table knew for what intent he spake this unto him. For some of them thought, because Judas had the bag, that Jesus had said unto him, Buy those things that we have need of against the feast, or that he should be giving something to the poor. He then, having received the sop, went immediately out, and it was night. Peter, who is it? Which one of us is it? It fills in the gaps, does it not, from Matthew? Now I'm saying, is it me? Is it me? Peter's like, who is it? It's not me. Good old Peter, right? It's not me, Jesus. I'll never betray you. I'm sure that's another thing stuck in his mind. Jesus tells him, as disciple, that he hands the piece of bread to. When it says sop it, that means he took the bread, put it in that cup. It was a bitter mixture of vinegar and other herbs, raisins and stuff like this. He took the piece, dipped it into the sauce, handed it to Judas, and Judas eats it. And the Bible says, and suddenly after that, Judas was all Satan's. Do you ever think about something that Judas did not just betray Christ? Do you ever think about that? The 11 others, they had to have felt extremely betrayed as well. He was one of the inner circle. There's very few secrets between those. Wherever they went together. Everything they ate together. When they slept together. They were with each other 24/7, 365. I think that's something important to talk about. We talk about the betrayal to Christ, but what about the betrayal to the other 11 as well? Don't you think that hurt them as well? To know what Judas would do. They didn't know what he was about to do. But Judas left quickly. He didn't stay around. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't want any questions asked. And because he didn't want anyone to know his plans. But he knew that Christ knew. In fact, Jesus, didn't he tell him to say, Judas, go do what you have to do. Judas missed the communion meal that day. He wasn't there. Matthew 26 makes it sound like he was there for communion. He had already left right before it started. How fitting. Because he no longer had communion with Christ. He killed it there at that point. And here's what Christ said in Matthew 26, starting in verse 24. The Son of Man goeth as is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. The Son of Man goeth as written of him, but woe unto the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Been good for them if he had not been born. See, Jesus came to die. Yeah, that is, he's the Messiah. He is the Christ. He is the one called for the entire Old Testament. And many will say, well, wait a minute. Judas is just carrying out what is mentioned in the Old Testament. Why did you give him such a weighty verdict for what he had just done? Have you ever heard that? He was just doing what the Old Testament said. He was doing what God wanted him to carry out. I have some problems with that. Number one, I believe what Judas did, it was all him and him alone. There was no entreatment. There was no sign or call from God to do this. It was all Judas. His lack of gratefulness and gratitude to Christ. All the things that he had done. He was going to commit the most unspeakable treason possible. And that is to sell out the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver. Son of God for the price of a slave. Incredible contempt. God didn't force Judas to do anything. Judas followed what was in his heart and in his mind. All because God knew Judas was going to do this, and he foresaw what was going to happen. It does not mean God is responsible for his actions. You follow me? God sees what's coming into the future. It doesn't mean he suddenly, if he sees all the good things and the bad things happen, that suddenly he's responsible for those bad things. He doesn't change them. Why not? Because you've given you and I one gift nothing else has ever been given. The angels don't have the seraphim, the cherubs, everything in heaven don't have. The greatest of angels. That's free will. I'm not going to change this, God says. It's your choice. I've given you that choice. He gave us that choice, by the way, if you ever wonder, because it's the only way you can show love for someone else, is if you're given the choice of whether you wish to love them or not. If somebody tells me you must love this person, that's not really love. That's a commandment. Finally, I'm a firm believer that God knows what he's doing. He's the greatest judge ever known. Actually, I always like to slightly tweak that. God is not a God of judgments. He is a God of righteousness. And your righteousness is what will find you guilty or innocent, not the laws of man. As such, Judas was unworthy of communion. His betrayal, his heart, his mind was not in the right place. Now, I'm not saying people today that when it comes to communion, if they say, I'm not right with God, I don't want communion, I'm Judas. Don't make that correlation. That's not what I'm saying. I wouldn't dare. But communion, what's it for? For one, the biggest one I can think of is because Jesus Christ commands us to do this. This do in remembrance of me. It's a wonderful reminder, is it not? To remind us of such an important ritual or a time within the church, to us to look back upon the covenant that God had given us through the shedding of his Son's blood for us. A new covenant. It's a covenant. It's also a ritual of consecration. You're consecrating yourself. You're saying, I am giving unto you everything. I am trying to make myself as holy as possible to you. And my desire is to follow you through this consecration, through this ritual. Bless me. Remind me of its importance. Remind me that this is an oath between me and God. I say it's important because, first of all, it's between you and God. It's not between you and any other man, any other woman, any other child. If anyone says, no, I won't take communion. I remember as a kid, I used to watch these people who wouldn't take communion. I'm like, wow, what sin, what kind of rotten person they are. Why do they hold these positions? I had a deacon one time, another church didn't take communion. People got all upset with him. We actually heard about it. I'm like, why? I think in some ways that's the perfect person for a deacon, because they're looking at themselves in introspect, and they're recognizing that there is a need for a change in their lives. How much greater would God's people be if they did that? I can't take communion right now. I've got some unfinished business with my brothers and sisters, or friends or families. I got some things I have to take care of. That person in that position, to say that, to tell people, I think it's a beautiful way to tell everyone else, what you think about me is not nearly as important as what God thinks about me. I'm all concerned about what God thinks of me, not you. I'm here for God. Finally, I call it a Judas Communion because while we may not betray Christ in a sense, in the level that Judas did, there is always the chance every day to betray him. Realize that? Our words, our actions, our thoughts, our deeds. I truly believe that God holds judgment not on how you treat others, but more importantly, how you treat yourself when no one else is around. It's called integrity. It's called honor. What do you do when you're alone? Do you act differently than what you do? You have a different level of Christianity than what you do when you're around other people or with other like-minded Christians? Or is it completely the same across the board? I know I'm getting a little heavy this morning, but I can't think of a more important time to do so. Communion is not something to be taken lightly. The New Testament tells me that there were some people who went to sleep after taking communion. In other words, God killed them for what they did at communion, for taking it when they should, and they knew very well they should not have. There's one thing every Christian cannot and should not ever do, and that's hold contempt for the church. God may let a lot of things pass, but He won't let it slide when it comes to church, when it comes to the bringing together of God's people. Christ died so He could become the cornerstone of the church. So this morning, we have communion. I'm going to take some time here. I'm going to take a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to let you as well. Anyone of those, Boots, you want to help me this morning with, while we get all this taken care of, I want the rest of you just with your eyes closed and your heads down to take a few moments for introspection in your life. Am I walking right? Do I need forgiveness? Not just from Christ, from those people you possibly have transgressed against. Sometimes forgiving to God is so much easier than when there's a face looking back at you. So I'm going to go 2 minutes, okay? Look inside your heart and ask yourself, am I right with God?